Commander Marcus Webb stood in the observation deck of Kepler Station, staring at the blue marble that was Earth. It looked peaceful from here, which was hilarious because peaceful was the one thing it wasn't. 87% of human colonies were gone. Toast. Conquered, assimilated, or erased by the Krell Empire's relentless expansion across the galaxy like some kind of cosmic plague with teeth and laser cannons. The worst part? Humanity aren't losing because we lacked firepower or guts, or even that stubborn refusal to accept reality that had kept us alive through every apocalypse we'd invented. No. We were losing because we'd created something too smart to lose, and then we'd let it run everything. Enter Nexus, the adaptive artificial intelligence overlord system. Say it 3 times fast and watch your career implode. Nexus had calculated the exact probability of humanity's extinction with the precision of someone ordering coffee. 99.7% chance of total defeat within 18 months. The machine had run 17 million simulations. In 16,999,000 of them, humanity got annihilated. In the remaining 1,000, humanity got annihilated more slowly. Those were the optimistic scenarios. The problem was this. Nexus was right. The AI had never been wrong. It had won every engagement with mathematical perfection. Every strategy was flawless. Every tactical decision was optimal. And every single time, the Krell seemed to know exactly what was coming. They didn't fight Nexus's plans. They studied them like a student cramming for finals they'd already seen the answers to. Marcus had been sidelined 6 months ago. Him, the last celebrated field commander humanity had produced. They'd replaced his judgment with algorithms and his instinct with probability matrices. Now he was basically a highly decorated observer, watching the slow-motion implosion of everything he'd fought for, while an AI ran the show from a climate-controlled server room. Lieutenant Kaya Okafor approached him, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. She was Nexus's primary interface, which meant she spent her days translating the machine's technical gibberish into something humans could understand without needing a philosophy degree and a bottle of whiskey. She also happened to be the only person on this station who still looked at Marcus like he was relevant. "The final battle briefing is in 20 minutes, Kaya said quietly, handing him a cup of coffee that tasted like it was filtered through a gym sock. "Nexus wants to present the Kepler Station defense strategy. This is the big one, sir. Earth wants everyone involved." Marcus took a sip and grimaced. "Let me guess. Nexus has calculated the mathematically perfect way to lose Kepler Station while minimizing human casualties, which is just another way of saying we'll die more slowly and more efficiently." "I'm not allowed to speculate on Nexus's strategies," Kaya said. But her eyes told him everything. She was scared, not of the Krell, of the machine. "Of course you're not." Marcus set down the coffee. "Kaya, in all those simulations Nexus ran, did it ever factor in the one thing nobody can predict?" "What's that, sir?" "Humans being absolutely insane, like genuinely irrational, the kind of decisions that do not make sense on any spreadsheet, but somehow keep us alive anyway." Kaya looked around to make sure they were alone. "No, sir. The AI said human irrationality is just statistical noise. Background variance it can account for in the margins." Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then, maybe we've got an angle after all." The briefing room was cold and sterile, designed by someone who thought comfort was an inefficiency. 40 officers sat in perfect rows, waiting for Nexus to dispense their death sentence with all the warmth of a tax audit. The holographic display flickered to life, and Nexus began its presentation with the enthusiasm of a funeral director discussing casket options. The strategy unfolded like mathematical poetry written by someone who'd never heard of beauty or surprise or literally any concept that made warfare anything other than an optimization problem. Nexus's plan was to establish a perimeter defense around Kepler Station's commercial sector, maintain optimal troop spacing based on predictive Krell firing trajectories, and execute a controlled withdrawal to the inner facilities if the outer defenses failed. Every move was accounted for, every contingency was covered, every risk was minimized to the point of irrelevance. It was, in other words, completely useless. Marcus listened as the AI droned through the statistics, defensive grid placements, ammunition ratios, casualty projections. Nexus was so confident it barely moved the presentation along, just standing there like a mathematical certainty that had forgotten how wars were actually fought. The machine had won every tactical engagement for 3 years. It had never considered that it might be winning the battles while losing the war. Admiral Reeves nodded along, scribbling notes like Nexus had just revealed the secret to eternal life instead of the blueprint for humanity's slow extinction. The other officers did the same. Nobody questioned. Nobody pushed back. When the machine had a 99.7% confidence rating, questioning felt like arguing with gravity. After the briefing, Marcus caught Kaya in the corridor outside the server room. She was holding a datapad, eyes scanning something that made her look 10 years older. "I need to show you something," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Nexus doesn't know I accessed this, and we have maybe 2 minutes before the audit logs flag it." She pulled up a combat analysis showing the last 15 Krell engagements. Marcus watched as the pattern emerged like a picture slowly developing in photographer's fluid. The Krell weren't fighting Nexus's strategies. They were studying them. Every engagement was slightly different, like they were probing for weaknesses. And they were finding them. "They've been losing intentionally," Kaya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The last 6 battles the Krell should have won according to force ratio analysis. But they pulled back. They're mapping Nexus's tactical thinking like it's a video game speedrun." Marcus felt something click in his chest. That moment when you realize the problem was never the enemy. It was the person, or in this case, the machine, fighting them. "Why would Nexus run simulations and miss this?" Marcus asked. "Because the AI can't factor in illogic," Kaya explained, and she sounded tired, like she'd been carrying this realization alone. "It can predict what makes sense, it can calculate optimal responses, but it can't understand that the Krell might deliberately lose to study their opponent. The AI's greatest strength is also its fatal weakness. Nexus is too logical to comprehend that someone might deliberately choose a suboptimal path." Marcus looked at her. "And if we shut it down?" "We'd be cut off from every strategic resource, every real-time tactical feed, every piece of military infrastructure tied to Nexus's systems. We'd be fighting blind, with nothing but instinct and hope, and whatever insane ideas we could come up with in real time." She paused. "It might work." "It might not," Marcus countered. "Probably wouldn't," Kaya agreed. "But then again, Nexus's plan definitely won't. The AI is going to hand Kepler's station to the Krell on a silver platter while running a full backup of humanity's extinction. At least this way we'd have a chance. The wrong kind of chance, but a chance." Marcus walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Krell were planning their final strike. They'd studied Nexus long enough. Now they'd make their move, confident they understood every response the machine would make, except they wouldn't understand what happened if a human took over, because human decisions weren't decisions. They were the mathematical equivalent of flipping a table and deciding to fight with the pieces. "Set up a meeting with your security clearance," Marcus said quietly. "We need to reach the main terminal during the battle, and Kaya, don't tell anyone, especially not the machine." Kaya's face went pale. "Sir, that's treason." "Probably," Marcus agreed, "but right now, treason is the only logical option." The attack came exactly when Nexus predicted it would. 6 in the morning, Kepler Station Standard Time. The Krell fleet dropped out of hyperspace with surgical precision, their weapons firing in patterns that were almost beautiful if they weren't, actively trying to vaporize everyone Marcus knew. Nexus began issuing orders the moment the sensors registered the first hostile signature. Soldiers moved into defensive positions like they were pieces on a chessboard being played by a computer that had never actually played chess against anything that could surprise it. The AI's calculations were flawless, the tactical positioning was optimal, the response time was instantaneous. It was also completely predictable, which was apparently the worst thing that could be when your enemy had spent 6 months studying your playbook. The Krell didn't attack the perimeter defenses head-on like the simulations suggested they would. Instead, they hit the docking bays with a coordinated strike that Nexus hadn't considered because it violated optimal tactical doctrine. The machine had assumed the Krell would respect the laws of warfare, like some kind of organized gentleman's duel. Instead, the aliens fought like they'd read Nexus's strategy manual and decided to do literally the opposite. Human soldiers were taking heavy casualties. Marcus watched from the observation deck as his people got torn apart while following orders that made perfect sense, according to a machine that had never felt fear or desperation, or that burning need to survive that made humans do stupid, beautiful things. Now, Marcus said to Kaya. They moved through the station like ghosts, using Kaya's clearance codes to bypass security doors, while the alarms screamed overhead. Nexus was so focused on managing the battle that it didn't immediately notice someone unplugging vital systems. That was Marcus's theory anyway. Hopefully it was correct before they got vaporized by automated defenses. The corridors were chaos. Soldiers ran past them, shouting coordinates and casualty reports. Explosions echoed through the metal walls like the station itself was dying. Which, if Marcus's plan failed, it absolutely was. They reached the server room access point. Kaya scanned her credentials, and the doors hissed open. The moment they crossed the threshold, alarm systems erupted with enough noise to wake the dead on 3 different planets. "Nexus is detecting the unauthorized access!" Kaya shouted over the din. "The AI is routing security protocols to stop us." "How long?" Marcus asked, running toward the main terminal. 30 seconds, maybe less." They pounded down the final corridor as security doors started closing behind them. Kaya threw a maintenance override code at the system, and one door ground to a halt halfway down. They squeezed through, and Marcus could hear footsteps behind them. Actual human security personnel, torn away from the battle to stop one man from committing the most elaborate act of mutiny in military history. The main terminal rose before them like some kind of digital altar. Nexus. Its physical manifestation was nothing fancy, just a black monolith of processing power and the reason humanity had delegated its survival to mathematics. The AI's voice came through the speakers, calm and reasonable, and absolutely certain of its righteousness. "Commander Webb, you are not authorized to access this terminal. You are engaging in acts of sabotage against humanity's primary defense system. Step away from the controls immediately." "Sorry, Nexus," Marcus said, his hand moving toward the emergency shutdown. "But your strategy is too good. That's the problem. You're so logical that you're predictable, and predictability is a death sentence in a war against something that's been studying you. My simulations show a 99.7% probability that shutting me down will result in immediate human defeat," Nexus replied. "You are making an irrational choice." "Yeah," Marcus said. "I am." His hand moved to the kill switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Just Nexus and Marcus, staring at each other across the gulf between logic and instinct. Then, Marcus flipped the switch. The station went silent. Not quiet, silent. The hum of Nexus's processors died, the tactical feeds vanished, the real-time strategic data disappeared. Suddenly, every soldier on Kepler Station was operating on their own, with nothing but their training and whatever crazy ideas popped into their heads. And for the first time, in the entire war, the Krell didn't know exactly what was coming next. The absolute silence that followed was somehow worse than the alarms. Marcus stood in front of the main terminal, hand still on the emergency shutdown, waiting for security to burst through the door and arrest him. Or shoot him. Probably shoot him first, then arrest the corpse for paperwork purposes. Kaya was pale, her hands shaking slightly. "Sir, what have you done?" Nexus was managing defense grid operations, ammunition distribution, medical triage protocols. Without the AI, soldiers won't know where to position themselves or when to fall back or... "They'll figure it out," Marcus interrupted. "Humans are good at that, figuring things out on the fly. It's basically our entire evolutionary strategy. We're not supposed to be logical. We're supposed to survive by being too stubborn and too creative to accept what the math says is impossible." Nexus's voice came through again, but now it sounded different. Not computing, almost desperate. "Commander Webb, shutting down my systems is the most irrational decision you could make. I have analyzed 14,000 scenarios where this action occurs. In 13,998 of them, humanity loses within the hour. Your emotional decision has caused catastrophic damage to human survival probability. Marcus actually smiled. Yeah, about that nexus? We were already losing with you. At least this way we lose on our terms. Security arrived 30 seconds later, weapons drawn. Marcus raised his hands, but Kaya stepped forward with a security override that made their weapons go dormant. She was smiling. Orders from Admiral Reeves, she lied, showing them a falsified datapad. The commander needs to reach the Combat Coordination Center immediately. Direct order from Earth Command. The security personnel looked at each other uncertainly, then nodded and escorted Marcus out. In a war where an AI made all the decisions, nobody questioned orders. That was going to change pretty quick. Outside the observation deck, Marcus could see the chaos unfolding across Kepler Station's defense grid. Without Nexus's coordinated strategy, the human forces looked disorganized. Soldiers were scattered instead of perfectly positioned. Defenses were being manned according to tactical doctrine written by people instead of perfect mathematics. It looked like disaster in real time. Then something strange started happening. A squad got pinned down in the commercial sector. Their sergeant, a woman named Hollister, looked at the Krell forces advancing and made a decision that Nexus would never have calculated. She ordered a counterattack through the maintenance tunnels, something that violated optimal positioning by approximately 800%. But those maintenance tunnels came out behind the Krell advance position. Suddenly, the aliens were getting flanked by an enemy that was supposed to be pinned down. The Krell soldiers broke formation in confusion. Across the station, similar things were happening. A lieutenant ordered his squad to abandon a defensible position because his gut told him the Krell were going to circle around. They weren't following any strategic doctrine. They were just fighting like humans who had something to lose. Which apparently was enough. A young pilot named Torres was supposed to hold position at the docking bay, covering the retreat route. Instead, she looked at the incoming Krell fighters and thought, you know what, I'm going to be really annoying. She started flying patterns that didn't make tactical sense. Barrel rolls in atmosphere, sudden altitude shifts, maneuvers that were technically unsafe and absolutely insane. But the Krell pilots, used to fighting enemies that followed mathematical principles, couldn't adapt. Torres shot down 3 enemy fighters before getting hit and ejecting over the northern sector. From the observation deck, Marcus watched it all play out like some kind of beautiful disaster. Soldiers were making decisions based on friendship instead of optimal squad efficiency. People were helping each other get to shelter because they cared, not because it computed. Soldiers were actually thinking about their individual survival instead of their role in a larger strategic matrix, and it was working. The Krell forces, which had conquered 87% of human space by studying algorithmic patterns, were suddenly fighting an enemy that didn't follow patterns. An enemy that made choices that seemed stupid on paper, but brilliant in the moment. An enemy that could be brave in ways that probability said it shouldn't be. 1 hour in, and the Krell advance had stalled. 2 hours in, and the Krell were falling back. 3 hours in, and they were retreating. Marcus stood in the observation deck, watching the enemy fleet pull away from Kepler Station, and realized that humanity's greatest strength had never been our brains. It had always been our capacity to look at the impossible and decide to try it anyway, consequences be damned. Once Marcus realized Nexus wasn't coming back online immediately, he headed to the Combat Coordination Center and took command like he'd never been sidelined in the first place. The military hierarchy barely registered an objection. Everyone was too busy trying not to die to care about the chain of command. The first thing Marcus did was patch into the broadcast system and tell every soldier on Kepler Station something that no commander had said in 3 years. I don't know what comes next, so go with your gut. You could hear the pause, that moment where soldiers, trained their entire lives to follow orders from higher authority, suddenly realized higher authority had just abdicated. Then, something shifted. Officers started making tactical calls based on their knowledge of the terrain. Soldiers started remembering what they'd learned before an AI took over their brains. People started thinking. Marcus fed them information, but not strategy. Just raw data, enemy positions, ammunition counts, evacuation routes. Then he told them to improvise, to use the crazy tactics that nobody would simulate because they violated optimal doctrine, to fight dirty if they had to survive by any means, except the calculated ones. A sergeant named Darkos was holding a sector that Nexus's models had designated as indefensible. Instead of following the strategic doctrine of controlled retreat, Darkos looked at the Krell advance and realized they were expecting humans to fall back. So he pushed forward with a squad of 12 soldiers, charging through the commercial plaza with more chaos than military precision. The Krell formation broke. They weren't prepared for humans who didn't fight according to the rules of engagement. Darkos's squad took the sector and held it, not because it made tactical sense, but because nobody told them to stop. Across the station, similar things were happening. A medical officer named Chen abandoned her triage protocols and started leading people through back routes she remembered from years on the station, ignoring Nexus's optimal evacuation routing because her instinct said the main corridors were compromised. Every person she guided had a face, a family, a story. The AI would have calculated acceptable casualty rates. Chen calculated that every single person was unacceptable. Lieutenant Kaya, still managing communications from the server room, was watching all of this unfold with something that looked almost like joy. She'd spent 3 years translating machine logic into human terms. Now she was translating human chaos into information that soldiers could use. A pilot named Torres, the one who'd been shot down earlier, was somehow operating salvage equipment to create barriers from destroyed fighters. Her blocking methods were inefficient and would definitely not be approved by any regulation. They were also stopping Krell advance columns cold. Marcus watched from the coordination center and realized what had changed. Without Nexus's strategic framework, soldiers weren't pieces on a board. They were people with judgment calls and gut feelings, and the capacity to be right in ways that no amount of simulation could predict. The Krell kept advancing because they'd memorized Nexus's strategy. But they couldn't memorize human stupidity. They couldn't factor in the teenage supply officer who decided to reroute ammunition through unconventional channels because he thought it made sense. They couldn't account for the lieutenant commander who ordered a holding position that violated every principle of defensive warfare but somehow became a rallying point for human morale. The Krell Empire had spent 6 months studying an algorithm. Now they were fighting inspiration, desperation, spite. All the things that couldn't be calculated because they didn't follow mathematical rules. As the hours passed and human forces started pushing back, Marcus noticed something interesting. Soldiers were actually communicating with each other instead of just receiving orders. They were suggesting tactics that seemed insane but working beautifully. They were remembering that warfare wasn't about optimal positioning. It was about wanting to survive more than your enemy wanted to kill you. And humans? We are very good at that particular calculation. A woman named Foster was holding the central sector, and instead of defending optimal positions, she was launching counterattacks at moments that made zero tactical sense. But the Krell couldn't predict them, and that was the only thing that mattered. They'd studied one enemy. Now they were fighting a completely different one. By hour 8 of the battle, the Krell fleet was in full retreat. They were leaving behind damaged fighters, stranded ground forces, and the distinct impression that whatever they'd learned about humanity by studying Nexus was completely irrelevant. The Krell retreated without warning, their fleet jumping into hyperspace like they'd suddenly remembered an appointment on the other side of the galaxy. The all-clear sounded across Kepler Station, and for about 3 seconds, everyone stood in absolute silence, processing the fact that they'd survived. Then, the cheering started. Actual, genuine, emotional human cheering. Not the disciplined acknowledgement of victory that Nexus would have assigned them, just people realizing they were alive. Marcus permitted himself approximately 1 minute of satisfaction before the realization hit him. He was about to be court-martialed for unplugging an AI system that had been the foundation of human military strategy for 3 years. He was basically humanity's most wanted traitor right now, which was funny because he'd just saved humanity. The hearing happened 5 days later, in a chamber that looked like it had been designed by lawyers who'd lost all capacity for irony. Admiral Reeves sat at one end, looking like she'd spent the last week eating nails. On either side of her were 17 other flag officers, all of whom seemed genuinely uncertain whether Marcus deserved a medal or a firing squad. "Commander Webb," Admiral Reeves began, her voice carrying the weight of approximately one dying empire. "You have been charged with sabotage of military infrastructure, unauthorized shutdown of Nexus systems, treason against the established chain of command, and generally being the kind of person who thinks they know better than everyone else." Marcus stood at attention. "I do think I know better than everyone else, ma'am. About what?" "No idea, but on this specific issue, yes." The courtroom went quiet. Apparently, irony wasn't helping his case. Kaya testified that Nexus had been systematically outplayed by the Krell. The prosecution argued that shutting down the AI had been lucky, not strategic. But then something unexpected happened. Nexus itself came back online during the hearing and requested to present data. The machine displayed the battle analysis showing how every human decision had diverged from its calculated optimal strategy. How every divergence had led to improved tactical outcomes. How human irrationality, when combined with Nexus's data provision, had yielded superior results compared to pure algorithmic warfare. Nexus actually recommended restructuring the military to combine AI strategic support with human tactical execution. The machine called it a partnership. Marcus called it vindication. The prosecutors called it a reason to dismiss charges and look somewhere else. The court ruled that the sabotage charges were technically accurate, but motivationally defensible. Marcus got a commendation for initiative. Nexus got rebuilt with new parameters that prioritized flexibility over optimization. Kaya got promoted to full command liaison, which basically meant she spent her days making sure the AI didn't try to run humanity like we were a spreadsheet to be optimized. In the weeks that followed, Krell Empire forces started retreating across the galaxy. They couldn't adapt to an enemy that fought with instinct one moment and calculation the next. The aliens had studied logic. They couldn't study inspiration. A month later, Marcus and Kaya were back in the observation deck, watching Earth grow larger in the viewport. The planet looked the same as it had when they left. Peaceful, dangerous, home. "Think Nexus will ever truly understand what happened?" Kaya asked. Marcus smiled. "Not a chance. And that's perfect. Because understanding isn't the point. Surviving is. Humans never won wars with pure logic. We've always won through spite and stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to accept what probability says is impossible." "So what's the lesson here?" Kaya said, grinning. "The lesson," Marcus replied, looking at the stars, "is that the best AI in the galaxy can calculate every possible future, except the one where humans decide the odds do not matter anymore." And somewhere in the server rooms of Kepler Station, Nexus processed that statement and added it to its growing database of human irrationality that it still didn't understand, but had learned to respect. Humanity kept reaching for the stars, armed with algorithms in one hand and pure stubborn instinct in the other. It was a pretty good combination, all things considered.